Thomas Calloway died on a Tuesday in March, and the world did not pause for it. The job site where it happened was a renovation on the east side of Raleigh, a client's second floor, the kind of work Thomas had done 10,000 times in his career. He was carrying drywall up a flight of stairs when his left arm went numb, and by the time the other workers reached him, he was already sitting on the landing with his back against the wall and the particular expression of a man who has just understood something large and irreversible. The paramedics said it was fast. Willa Calloway heard this several times in the days that followed from the paramedics themselves, from the funeral director, from the pastor at the graveside, and each time someone said it, she nodded and said she understood. And each time she was less certain what fast was supposed to mean or why it was supposed to help. He was 52 years old. He had been, for the entire 19 years of Willa's life, the only person she could count on to be exactly where he said he would be doing exactly what he said he would do. He was a man of specific habits and particular commitments, a man who kept a folded piece of graph paper in the breast pocket of his Carhartt jacket at all times, who sketched his measurements and layouts before he touched a single nail, who said that the difference between good work and sloppy work was the 30 seconds you spent thinking before you started. He smelled of sawdust and the particular variety of machine oil that came from his Milwaukee drill set, which was the best thing he owned, and when Willa was small, she used to fall asleep on his shoulder on car rides and wake up to that smell and know without opening her eyes that she was safe. The funeral was small. 11 people, including Willa and the pastor who mispronounced Thomas's middle name Roy, not Ray. Something Thomas would have noted without saying anything about it because he was the kind of man who collected small grievances and released them quietly into the air where they could dissolve without anyone getting hurt. The pastor was earnest and brief and said the things that pastors say at funerals for men who never sat in their pews, the general things about God's plan and rest from labor, and the green pastures of the 23rd Psalm. Willa sat in the front row in a black dress she had borrowed from a woman she worked with at the Sheets on Garner Road, and she listened to the pastor and she tried to remember the last thing her father had said to her. It had been something about the truck, something about the oil change being overdue, and the light on the dashboard that had been on for 2 weeks. Something ordinary, the kind of thing you say when you assume there will be 1,000 more conversations after it. She had told him she would take it in on Saturday, and he had said good, and then he had kissed her forehead the way he had done every morning since she was old enough to stand, and he had gone to work. And that was the last of it. Dale Calloway stood in the back of the church with his arms crossed and his face arranged into the specific blankness of a man attending an obligation. He was Thomas's older brother by 4 years, and he had the same broad frame as Thomas, but had used it differently over the decades in ways that had made him look at once larger and somehow less substantial, like a building that had been constructed with good materials but never properly finished. He left before the reception. Willa noticed this, but said nothing. She had met Dale perhaps a dozen times in her life, never for more than an afternoon, and she understood from those meetings that he was a man who found most situations inconvenient and most people slightly disappointing. 3 weeks later, he came back. Willa was in the apartment packing boxes when she heard the diesel engine in the parking lot below. She looked through the kitchen window and saw the flatbed trailer, and she saw Sheila sitting in the passenger seat of the truck, scrolling her phone, and she felt something drop through the floor of her chest. Not surprise exactly, but its cousin, the feeling of a thing you had been waiting for without admitting you were waiting for it. She met Dale at the door. He walked past her without stopping, the way people walk past things they have already decided not to engage with, and went directly to the back room where Thomas kept his tools. "Your daddy owed me $4,000, Dale said, not looking at her. "I'm collecting." Willa stood in the doorway. "He never mentioned owing you anything." "Well, he did." Dale opened the rolling toolbox and began methodically loading its drawers onto a dolly, his movements efficient and practiced a man who had done this calculation in advance. The Milwaukee drill set, the orbital sander, the router, the table saw which Thomas had bought, used from a job site in Cary, and spent 2 weekends reconditioning until it ran as smoothly as the day it was made. The welding rig which Thomas had saved for 2 years to buy, which he had told Willa, was going to open up a whole new category of work for him. "You got papers saying otherwise," Dale said. She didn't. She stood against the wall and watched him make 3 trips. Tools first, then the truck keys off the hook by the door. Then the kitchen table, which Dale said he'd built himself 15 years ago and was getting back, though Willa had never heard this claim before and had never seen Dale build anything. She watched the apartment go hollow around her, the corners where things had been acquiring the particular emptiness of places that will not be filled again. Dale paused at the door on his last trip out. His eyes moved across the room with the inventory sweep of a man who has learned to read a space for value, and they landed on the shelf above the counter, the worn leather Bible between the stack of utility bills and the coffee mug with the chipped rim that Willa had never gotten around to throwing away. "You can keep your daddy's church stuff," he said. The door closed. The diesel engine started. Willa stood in the living room with her arms wrapped around herself and listened to the sound of the trailer pulling out of the parking lot, and then she sat down on the floor. She didn't cry. She had done that already in the shower at 2 in the morning and in her car in the parking lot at work before she remembered that the car was gone now too, Dale having produced some documentation about the truck that she hadn't had the energy or the legal knowledge to contest. She felt instead that hollow, scraped quality that comes after the initial grief has done its sharpest work. Not empty exactly, but cleared the way a field looks after a fire. Everything flattened and waiting. The landlord had called the previous week. The lease was in Thomas's name. She had 30 days. She had no credit, no co-signer, and a part-time job at the sheet station that paid $11 an hour, and she had already done the math in every direction that math could be done, and it came out the same every time. It was past midnight when she finally got up off the floor. She made instant coffee in the microwave. Dale had taken the kettle, and she stood at the strip of laminate that served as a counter, and she looked at the shelf. The Bible sat between the absent things like a word left in a sentence after the rest of the sentence has been erased. Thomas hadn't been religious in any organized way. He didn't go to church, didn't pray before meals, didn't talk about God in the direct personal way that some people in the county did. But he had kept this Bible on the shelf for as long as Willa could remember, and she had seen him open it sometimes late in the evening when he thought she was asleep, turning the thin pages slowly with his callous thumbs in the way of a man looking for something specific in a document he has read many times. She pulled it toward her. The spine was cracked from decades of handling. The pages were the particular translucent thinness of Bible paper, their edges soft and dark from years of fingers. She opened it without any specific intention, the way you open a thing when your hands need something to do, and she let the pages fall where they fell. They fell somewhere in the middle, Psalms ending, Proverbs beginning. And there between the two, folded twice so precisely that the edges lined up to the millimeter, in the way Thomas lined up everything he handled was a piece of paper. She almost missed it. The paper was the same cream color as the Bible pages, and in the dim light of the apartment, it blended almost seamlessly into the surrounding text. But her thumb caught the edge when she turned the page, and she felt the different weight of it, the slight thickness, and she stopped. She unfolded it. It was a deed, stamped and signed by the county clerk's office with a blue ink seal that had faded but remained legible, dated 7 years ago. 2 acres of land lot, 14 Miller Creek Road in the township of Ridley, Raleigh County, North Carolina. The purchase price was recorded as $340. The name on it was Thomas Roy Calloway. Willa read it 3 times. Her father had owned land, 2 acres of something somewhere 40 miles north of the apartment where they had lived for 11 years, and he had never said a single word about it. She set the deed down and turned the page behind it. A second piece of paper, this one unlined in Thomas's handwriting, the block capitals he used for everything from grocery lists to job estimates. Each letter formed with the careful precision of a man who had learned to take the extra second with everything, because the extra second was usually the difference between right and wrong. A map, drawn by hand, distances marked in Thomas's neat notation. Route from Garner to the property 40 miles north. A town called Ridley circled twice. Then an arrow east along a road labeled Miller Creek Road, and at the end of the arrow a small X in the notation 14. Willa sat with the deed and the map in her hands until the coffee went cold. 7 years. Her father had owned this land for 7 years, which meant he had bought it when Willa was 12, which meant he had been carrying this secret through her entire adolescence, through her high school years, and the year after graduation, when she had gone to community college for a semester and then stopped through all of it. Every Saturday morning, he had kissed her forehead and said he was picking up side work. Every Saturday evening, he had come home tired and smelling of sawdust in the outdoors, and she had assumed he was hanging cabinets or reframing someone's garage the way he sometimes did on weekends for extra money. She had never questioned it because there had been no reason to question it, because it was the ordinary pattern of her father's ordinary life. 360 Saturdays, 7 years of them. Whatever was at the end of Miller Creek Road, Thomas Calloway had been going there and doing something, and he had done it in total silence, and now he was dead, and the deed was in her hands, and she was sitting on the floor of a gutted apartment with 30 days to leave it. She did not sleep that night. She sat at the laminate counter with the deed and the map, and she looked at them and she thought about her father's hands, the specific texture of them, the permanent machine oil stain at the base of his right thumb, the way they moved with absolute certainty when he was working. Not fast exactly, but precise, every motion, deliberate and confident and correct. Those hands had built things her whole life, had wired the panel in their first apartment when the landlord refused to call an electrician, had fixed the frame of her bedroom door when it started sticking in winter, had made from the scraps of a kitchen renovation job a small bookshelf that still sat against the wall of her room and held more weight than its construction had any right to support. Those hands had been building something for 7 years. The Greyhound to Durham cost $19, which left Willa with 28. The driver was a heavy-set man who didn't make conversation, which she appreciated. She sat in the second row with her backpack on her knees and the deed folded in the front pocket of her jacket, and she watched the North Carolina landscape scroll past the familiar mix of strip mall and pine forest and flat agricultural land that characterized this part of the state, the long, flat distances that made the sky seem larger than it did anywhere else she had been. In Durham, she transferred to the County Connector, a bus service that operated through the rural townships north of the city, the kind of infrastructure that existed to connect the people the main lines didn't reach. She was the only passenger for the last 20 miles of the route, sitting in the back, while the driver navigated through a country of increasingly narrow roads and increasingly dense tree cover. He dropped her at a gas station in Ridley a little after noon. The town was small, a main street with the particular quality of places that have been exactly as they are for a very long time and intend to remain so. A hardware store, a diner, a Baptist church with a hand-painted sign announcing Sunday service, a post office the size of a large closet, the kind of place where the population was stable and the names on the businesses were the same names that had been on them for 2 generations. She went into the hardware store because it had an open sign, and the August heat was already establishing itself with serious intent. A man behind the counter looked up from a newspaper. He was perhaps 65, with thick forearms and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and the particular quality of stillness that belongs to men who have spent their working lives in physical labor and have arrived at a form of rest that is not inactivity so much as efficiency. All movement conserved until movement is required. The name on his apron was hand-stitched in blue thread, Marsh. "Help you find something," he said. "I'm looking for Miller Creek Road," Willa said. "Do you know where it is?" The man set his newspaper down. He took off his reading glasses and folded them carefully in his large hands. He studied her face for a long moment, the assessing, careful look of someone cross-referencing what they're seeing against something they already know. "You're Thomas's girl," he said. It was not a question. It had the quality of a recognition, something confirmed rather than discovered. Willa felt her stomach shift. "I'm Willa Calloway," she said. "Thomas was my father." The man nodded slowly. "Gareth Marsh. I knew your daddy for 7 years. He came in here every Saturday morning like clockwork. Coffee from the diner, then straight here." He paused. "I heard he passed. I'm real sorry." "Thank you," Willa said. She swallowed. "I found a deed for some land on Miller Creek Road. I didn't know he owned anything out here." Gareth Marsh was quiet for a moment. Something moved across his face that she couldn't entirely read, not discomfort exactly, but the expression of a man who is deciding how much of something he is the right person to tell. "Miller Creek is about 4 miles east of here," he said finally. Take this road out of town, past the church, hang a left at the fork. Gravel road goes about 2 miles. Lot 14 is on the right. You'll see a break in the tree line. What's there? Willa asked. Gareth Marsh looked at her for a long moment. I think you ought to go see for yourself, he said. She walked. 4 miles in the August heat, the sun doing its serious work on her shoulders and the top of her head, her backpack straps pressing damp into her shirt. Past the Baptist church and its hand-painted sign. Past the fork in the road, where a rusted mailbox leaned at an angle that suggested it had been struck and then straightened by someone who had done a conscientious but not quite sufficient job of the repair. Onto the gravel road that Gareth had described, where the trees pressed in on both sides, and the sound of the highway dropped away, and the only sounds were her own footsteps on the gravel, and the birds moving through the canopy overhead, and the occasional pop of pine cones falling somewhere in the tree cover. She counted mailboxes. There were 2 on the entire 2-mile stretch of gravel, both rusted, both for lots that appeared through the trees to be long unoccupied, the structures on them visible in fragments through the pines, a collapsed barn roof here, a concrete block foundation with no structure remaining on it there. Then she saw the break in the tree line, a dirt path just wide enough for a truck cutting off the gravel road and disappearing between the pines. The entrance was marked by tire tracks worn into the earth from years of the same vehicle, turning in at the same angle, the specific permanent record of regular use, now growing over with grass that had not been disturbed in 3 weeks. Willa turned onto the path. It curved through the pines for perhaps 100 yards. The trees closed on both sides, the light going green and filtered in the way of forest light, and then the trees opened. She stopped. What she had expected if she had allowed herself to expect anything, which she mostly hadn't, because expectation had felt dangerous on a morning when she had exactly $28 and a 30-day notice was something small. A lot perhaps with some evidence of work begun and abandoned. A cleared space, the foundation of something never completed, or perhaps a modest structure, a hunting cabin of the sort that dotted these woods, 1 room, 4 walls, a basic roof. What she found was none of those things. In the center of a clearing that had been carefully established in the pine forest, the stumps of removed trees still visible at the perimeter, each one cut level with the ground, in the deliberate way of a man who had made a decision about where the clearing ended, stood a house. Not a shed, not a cabin. A house, 3 stories of it, built in the craftsman tradition with the particular care of someone who had studied the form and understood not just its aesthetics, but its engineering logic. The main structure rose from a wide covered porch to a 2nd story with dormered windows, and above that a 3rd story that stepped back from the 2nd, its roofline pitched at the steep angle of a structure designed to shed snow with serious intent. And at the front corner of the 3rd story, rising an additional 8 feet above the main roofline, a small tower with a framework of windows on all 4 sides. The whole thing was 35 feet tall. The walls were sheathed in rough-cut boards that had weathered to a warm gray. The roof was complete dark shingles, straight lines, no visible sagging, and she could see where sections of exposed rafter ends protruded at the eaves, in the craftsman manner, each one cut to the same angle, with the precision of a man who understood that the details that nobody sees are the ones that hold everything else up. It was unfinished. The exterior siding was incomplete on the north face, the sheathing boards still raw. The windows were a mix of installed glass and empty frames covered with plastic sheeting. The porch had no railings and no steps, the front door accessible only from the ground if you were willing to climb the threshold, suspended 3 feet above the earth on the raw ends of the floor joists. But it was a house, a real one, built from the ground up with real lumber and real craft, and the kind of structural integrity that you could see at a glance, even if you were 19 years old and had no formal training in construction, because some things announce their own quality simply by standing upright. Her father had built this, alone, every Saturday for 7 years, without telling her, without telling anyone as far as she knew. He had bought 2 acres of land for $340 at a county tax auction, and he had come here week after week with his tools and his graph paper and his particular patient way of doing things correctly, and he had built this. Willa stood at the edge of the clearing for a long time. There was no sound except the birds and the wind moving through the pines and the faint random creak of something in the upper structure of the house settling into the afternoon heat. The clearing was full of evidence of Thomas's presence. A stack of lumber covered with a blue tarp beside the south wall, the edges of the boards protected from weather by his characteristic neat arrangement. A wheelbarrow upended near the tree line, the same position you left a wheelbarrow when you were done for the day and expected to be back next week. A coil of orange extension cord hung on a nail near the side entrance. A water jug half full set on a flat stump near the porch. Everything arranged with the same precision that had characterized his tool storage. His job estimates his kitchen drawers. A man in the middle of a project. A man who had expected to come back. She walked around the house once before she tried to enter the way Thomas had taught her to walk around any unfamiliar structure. Before you touched it, look first, understand the shape of it, find where it wants to fail. The east face had the most finished exterior, and she could see through the east wall's window openings that one room inside had reached completion, the shadow of walls and a floor visible beyond the plastic sheeting. The north and west faces were at the sheathing stage. The south face had an entrance door, also plywood, also padlocked. She tried the padlock, locked. She tried the east window on the ground floor where the plastic sheeting was stapled to the frame. She worked her fingers under the edge and peeled it back and looked inside. One room, completely finished. The contrast with the unfinished exterior was disorienting, the way it is always disorienting to move from rough construction to completed space, as if you have crossed a threshold between two different states of being. The drywall was taped and painted a soft white applied evenly, no drips, no visible seams. The floor was tongue-and-groove pine sanded smooth and sealed the color of warm honey in the late afternoon light coming through the east-facing window. An actual window glass set in a frame looking out at the place where the morning sun would come through the pines. Against the east wall, beneath that window, a cot with a folded wool blanket on it. The blanket was dark green and neatly folded, the corners squared. A small shelf mounted on the east wall at a height. She noticed this immediately, the same way she noticed when something in a structure was calibrated to a specific person at exactly the height of her eye line. She had been 5'4" since she was 16. Against the west wall, a plastic storage bin with a camp stove on top, the kind that ran on propane canisters. A lantern with an unused wick. 2 canisters of propane taped together with blue painter's tape labeled in Thomas's block letters spare. On the shelf above the cot, 3 cans of beans, a box of Strike Anywhere matches, and a jar of peanut butter with the lid screwed down tight. He had stocked it like a room that expected someone to arrive unprepared. She climbed through the window. The room smelled like sawdust and pine resin, and something else, something familiar and deeply particular. The way smells are when they belong to a specific person in a specific context. Old Spice and machine oil in the outdoors. The smell of her father's jacket. The smell of his hugs on Saturday evenings when he came home tired. The smell that meant everything was all right, and you could stop holding whatever you had been holding until it arrived. Willa stood in the middle of the finished room and pressed her hands to her face. She stood there for a long time. When she lowered her hands, the room was still the room. The east window was still there, the afternoon light moving across the pine floor in the slow, unhurried way of light that has no deadline. The shelf was still at her eye line. The wool blanket was still folded at the exact angle of something Thomas had folded, the military precision of a man who had learned that folding a blanket correctly was not about the blanket. It was about the habit of care applied to everything. Large things and small things equally, because the discipline did not discriminate between them. She looked at the floor and the walls and the ceiling, and she thought about the number of Saturdays it took to produce this, the specific, enormous, patient arithmetic of her father's weekends, accumulated over 7 years into this room, this floor, this white-painted wall. She knelt by the cot. Under it, pushed to the far edge, she could see the corner of something. A book or something like a book. She lay flat on the floor and reached back, and her fingers found the spine of a spiral-bound notebook, the large kind, its cardboard cover thickened and slightly warped from moisture and use. She pulled it out. The cover was stained with paint rings and dried mud and what appeared to be coffee. Scratched into the cardboard in Thomas's block letters with something sharp, A nail maybe, or the tip of a compass, were 7 words: Willa's house. Started April 2019. Thomas R. Calloway. Willa sat on the floor with the notebook in her lap and did not move for a full minute. Then she opened it. The first page was a title page of sorts, Thomas's handwriting and pencil materials. List column 1, cost column 2, source column 3, lumber from Gareth's, roofing from the supply depot in Durham, windows salvaged from a renovation job in Cary. The accounting was meticulous down to the individual nail, every expenditure recorded in the flat, precise way Thomas had always managed money. Nothing wasted, nothing overlooked. She turned the page. The building notes continued for several entries: measurements, layouts, load calculations, the kind of technical notation that made complete sense to anyone who had grown up watching a contractor manage projects. But between the entries scattered throughout, like they had come to him while he was working and had to be written down before they escaped, were other things. Page 4. Cora's room, east window, so she gets morning light. She always said she wanted to wake up with the sun. Willa stopped. Cora. She had been called Cora exactly once in her life by her father when she was 7 years old, on a day when she had been crying over something she could no longer remember. And he had held her and called her Cora instead of Willa. And she had asked him why, and he had said it was his mother's name, and it meant heart. And that's what you are, he had said. So that's what I'll call you when you need to hear it. She turned to the next page. Page 7. Kitchen small, but hers. She doesn't need big. She needs her own. Page 11. Porch faces south. Big enough for 2 chairs. She'll want a dog someday. Page 14. Staircase going in next Saturday. Took me 3 weekends to get the geometry right. She'll want it to be something, not just a way to get upstairs. Make it something. She read until the light through the east window turned gold, then orange, then faded entirely. She did not use the lantern because she did not want to stop reading long enough to light it, so she read in the diminishing light, holding the notebook closer as the room darkened until the words were too faint to make out. The last entry she could read before the darkness made it impossible was page 23. Dated 2 weeks before Thomas died. Almost done. Give it to her on her 21st. She'll fight me on it. She'll say it's too much, but she needs to know she has somewhere. She needs to know I see her every day. I see her. Willa closed the notebook. She held it against her chest in the dark room her father had built in the house he had never gotten to finish, on the land he had bought with $340, and 7 years of Saturdays, and the dark and the silence came in through the east window, and she let them. She was still sitting there when the sound came from outside. Soft footsteps in the grass, careful and deliberate, and then a shape at the window where the plastic sheeting had peeled back from her entrance. A dog. Medium-sized, brown and white, with one ear torn in a way that had healed imperfectly, ribs just visible through fur that had the rough, ungroomed texture of a dog that lived outside. It stood at the window frame and looked at her with dark eyes that were cautious and patient, and somehow entirely unsurprised by her presence. She did not move. The dog did not move. They looked at each other across the threshold. After a long time, the dog climbed carefully through the window, walked 3 measured circles in the corner of the room, and lay down. It put its chin on its paws and closed its eyes with the complete trusting finality of an animal that has decided a place is safe. She looked at the dog in the corner of the room her father had built. She picked up the notebook and found the page by touch in the dark. Page 11. She'll want a dog someday. And then further down the same page, a note she hadn't finished reading in the fading light stray showed up. Skinny thing. Building him a shelter in case he's here when Cora comes. Named him Scout. The dog Scout lifted his head and looked at her and then put it back down. Willa pulled the wool blanket around her shoulders. It smelled like her father's jacket and something else underneath the pine-cold outdoors smell of a building that had been lived in on winter Saturdays for years. She looked up through the east window at the stars appearing in the sky above the pines, more stars than she ever saw in Garner, the dense rural dark of a place with no competing light for miles in any direction. She had $28. She had a backpack. She had a deed to 2 acres of land and the notebook of a man who had been building her something for 7 years and had run out of time before he could give it to her. She was not going back to Garner. She held the notebook and looked at the stars through the east window, and she made no announcement of this decision, said nothing aloud into the dark room because it was the kind of decision that was already finished before she knew she was making it. The way certain things are not chosen exactly, but recognized the way you recognize a thing you've been waiting for without knowing you were waiting. Scout's breathing steadied and slowed in the corner. Outside, the pines moved in whatever wind came off the valley at night. The finished room, her father's room, the first room he had built in the house he had built for her, settled around her with the particular quality of a space that has been waiting for its occupant with a patience that doesn't know how to be anything else. The house creaked once somewhere above her, the sound of a structure in its element. Talking, her father would have said. You just had to know what you were listening for. She woke to sunlight in her face. For 3 seconds, she didn't know where she was. Then she felt the wool blanket against her cheek and smelled the sawdust and heard Scout breathing in the corner, and she remembered all of it in the specific layered way that memory returns on the first morning in an unfamiliar place. The bus, the hardware store, the walk, the clearing, the house emerging from the pines like something that had been waiting at exactly those coordinates for exactly this moment. She sat up. The east window was doing what Thomas had intended it to do, delivering the morning light directly and without apology. The sun already clear of the tree line and filling the room with the particular quality of early summer light in North Carolina. Warm and generous and slightly golden. The kind of light that makes things look more finished than they are, that finds the grain in wood and the texture in plaster and makes them reveal themselves. She sat on the edge of the cot and looked around the finished room in the light. It was different from the night before. Everything was. The walls were painted with the kind of evenness that only comes from someone who has painted many walls and learned that speed is the enemy of quality. No visible brush marks, no drips frozen on the baseboard, no corners where the coverage thinned. The floor was sanded to a smoothness that showed the grain without feeling precious about it, sealed rather than varnished, practical in the way Thomas was practical about everything. The shelf on the east wall was mounted level to within a fraction of a degree. She could tell by the way the 3 cans of beans sat on it, each one resting flat, without any suggestion of wanting to roll. In the corner, the supply bin, camp stove, lantern, 2 canisters of propane with their blue painter's tape label, and on the shelf, beans matches peanut butter. He had stocked this room for a person arriving with nothing. She ate peanut butter on her fingers and drank water from the jug she found under the camp stove. The jug was sealed, the water inside still clean, and then she stood up and put on her jacket and picked up the notebook and went to explore the rest of what Thomas Calloway had built. She went alone. This felt important in a way she didn't examine too closely, the same instinct that had made her walk the 4 miles from town rather than asking Gareth Marsh for a ride. Some things needed to be encountered at your own pace, without the running commentary of someone who already knew the ending. She would learn more from the house in silence than she would from anyone's explanation of it. The ground floor was more extensive than the single finished room had suggested. The completed room occupied the southeast corner, the corner that caught the morning light through the east window and the warmth of the afternoon through the south wall. The rest of the ground floor was at various stages of completion. The kitchen occupied the southwest corner, hand-built cabinets of pine, sanded and sealed but not yet painted. Each door hung straight and operating cleanly on its hinges. The countertop markings were still visible on the cabinet tops, pencil lines showing where Thomas had planned to set the surfaces. The sink was in place, a deep farmhouse-style unit that Thomas had clearly salvaged from somewhere and reconditioned. The porcelain had a few chips sealed with epoxy, but the basin itself was sound. When Willa reached under the sink and turned the shut-off valve, cold water coughed through the faucet for 10 seconds, brown with disturbed sediment, and then ran clear. The well pump outside was working. Thomas had installed it himself. She could see his work in the way the pressure tank was mounted, the connections wrapped and sealed in his characteristic style, everything labeled with blue painter's tape. She stood at the kitchen sink and turned the water on and off twice. Running water, that was not nothing. The bathroom was adjacent to the kitchen, roughed in completely. PVC supply lines stubbed through the subfloor drain pipe set in concrete toilet flange, installed and sealed. A toilet sat unconnected in the corner, still in its box. The cardboard softened from humidity, but the unit itself intact. The shower pan was in place. The walls were sheathed but not drywalled, the framing and insulation visible between the studs. The electrical panel was on the back wall of the kitchen, a 16-circuit box, with every circuit labeled in Thomas's block letters. She found the main breaker, flipped it, and heard a hum somewhere in the house. An overhead light in the finished room came on, throwing a warm yellow glow out into the hall. The kitchen circuit produced light from a bare bulb socket that Thomas had mounted in the center of the ceiling. The bathroom circuit lit a work light mounted on a stud. Thomas had wired the panel himself, and she could see his work in the cables run neat, clipped to the studs at even intervals, each connection made with the care of a man who had said all his life that the one thing you couldn't afford to do sloppy was the wiring. She traced a run of 12-gauge from the panel to the kitchen outlet box and back again, with her eyes following the staples, counting the clips, and felt in the orderliness of it the same quality she had found in the painted room, in the level shelf, in the 3 squared corners of the folded blanket. The quality of a man who applied the same standard to everything without gradation or exception, because he understood that the standard was the point. She stood in the kitchen with the light on and the water running and looked at the cabinet Thomas had built. The doors were pine-sanded smooth. The grain raised slightly from the sealer he'd applied. Each one hung on concealed hinges with the precision of a man who understood that a door that didn't close right was a door that would eventually fail. He had built 8 of them, uniform in their dimensions, the gaps between them and their frames, even on all 4 sides, a consistency that required a specific kind of patience at each step. Not patience in the sense of waiting, but patience in the sense of refusing to move on until the current thing was correct. She put her hand on the nearest cabinet door and opened it. The hinge moved smoothly, and the door came to rest at 90 degrees and stayed there, balanced exactly level. She closed it, the latch engaged with a clean, definitive click. She felt the specific weight of what she was standing inside. Then she went upstairs. The staircase was in the center of the house. Thomas's reference to it in the notebook, make it something not just a way to get upstairs, made concrete and visible in its construction. It was a spiral, or close to it, a tight quarter-turn staircase that rose from the ground floor to the second with a graceful efficiency that made the most of the available footprint, each tread cut from the same pine as the ground floor. Each riser fitted with the precision of a man who understood that a staircase is a machine, and machines require tolerance. The handrail was rough, unsanded, a temporary piece of timber Thomas had clamped in place, but the structure beneath it was done correctly and permanently, the newel post mortised into the floor framing, with a joint that would outlast everything around it. She climbed. The second floor was at the framing stage throughout. 3 rooms defined by stud walls. She could see the layout of them from the landing at the top of the stairs, the way the building divided itself into sleeping spaces and a central hallway. The insulation was in the exterior walls, the roughened plumbing was run for a second bathroom, and the ceiling joists were in place. But there was no drywall, no flooring, no windows installed. The openings were covered with the same plastic sheeting as the ground floor's unfinished sections. She walked through the second floor, feeling the subfloor solid under her feet, reading the structure the way Thomas had taught her to read it. The load-bearing walls were clear from the sizing of the doubled studs at the openings. The headers above the window and door openings sized correctly for the spans they carried. The structure was sound. It was not finished, but it was right, the kind of right that meant finishing it was a matter of labor and materials rather than repair and correction. There was nothing here that needed to be undone before it could be built forward. Then she climbed to the 3rd floor. The stairs from the 2nd to the 3rd were steeper, a straight run, rather than a turn less refined. Thomas had clearly built them for access and intended to revisit them later to replace the rough lumber with something that matched the care of the main staircase. The 3rd floor was a single open space with the roof line angled down from the center ridge, the exposed rafters visible overhead in the clean geometry of a well-calculated roof structure, and at the front corner, the southeast corner where the tower, was a ladder that led up through a hatch in the tower floor to the observation room at the top. Willa climbed the ladder. The observation room was 8 feet square, timber frame with window openings on all 4 sides. The openings were empty, no glass yet, just the frames, the wind moving freely through the space. But the structure of the room was complete, the joinery tight, the corner posts plumb and square, the framing done with the same level of precision as everything below it, Thomas apparently incapable of building something at a lower standard simply because it was higher up or harder to see. She stood in the tower room and looked out. To the east, the pine forest rolling away toward the valley, the tops of the trees at eye level, and beyond them, the open land of the valley floor farms, and tree lines, and the glint of Miller Creek itself, visible as a silver thread through the green. To the north, more forest, the ridgeline visible above it, the Appalachian foothills, soft and blue in the morning haze. To the south, the clearing below the porch roof, the lumber stack, the upturned wheelbarrow, and beyond the clearing, the dirt path through the pines that connected this place to the world. To the west, the forest again dense and close, the light coming through it in shafts that moved as the branches moved slow and intermittent, the light of a place that had not been cleared of the trees that filtered it. In every direction, space and distance, and the particular quality of silence that belongs to places where no human construction is audible. No traffic, no machinery, nothing but the birds and the trees and the specific acoustic signature of high ground in early summer. The way sound carries differently at elevation cleaner, with less interference from the accumulated noise of proximity. Thomas had stood here. She knew this without needing evidence for it the way you know some things, because the knowing is rooted below the level of reasoning in some older and more reliable faculty than conscious thought. He had climbed this ladder on Saturday afternoons when the work was going well and stood in this unfinished room and looked out at the valley and the ridge and the creek below, and he had known what he was building this for, not the structure itself, but the view. It provided the specific gift of altitude. The way standing high changes what you can see and therefore what you can think about. She stayed in the tower for a long time. When she came back down, Opal Vance was standing in the clearing. Willa had not heard a truck on the path. She had been too high in the house for sound from the ground to reach her easily, and the sudden presence of another person in the clearing was startling, in the way that interruptions are startling when you have been alone with something important. But the woman standing there did not have the quality of an intruder. She was in her 70s, small and straight-backed in a flannel shirt and jeans and boots that had navigated decades of mud, and she stood with her hands in her jacket pockets, looking at the house with the expression of someone who has looked at it many times before and still finds it worth looking at. She turned when Willa came through the front porch, opening the door, still plywood, still padlocked. But she had found that the padlock was a precaution rather than a seal. The door hinged to swing without a key once you understood the mechanism. "You found it," the woman said. "I found it," Willa said. "Opal Vance, I live 2 miles east." She pointed. "I've been watching this property since your daddy stopped coming 3 weeks ago. Figured something was wrong. Then Gareth called." They stood in the clearing, and Willa looked at this woman who had been watching the property, watching for what she didn't ask yet. Opal looked at the house the way Thomas must have looked at it, the way people look at things they have watched grow from nothing and have developed opinions about. "You knew what he was doing," Willa said. "I knew from year 3, Opal said. "I thought at first he was a hunter. Then I saw the lumber deliveries. Walked over with a thermos one Saturday morning and introduced myself." She paused. "He was shy about it at first, didn't want to explain, but after a while he told me." "Told you what?" Opal looked at her steadily. "That he was building a house for his daughter, that you'd been through some hard years after your mama left, and he wanted you to have a place that was yours, not rented, not borrowed. Yours." She stopped. "He said he was going to give it to you when you turned 21. Had the whole thing planned. Drive up here, hand you the key, let you walk through it, finished." Willa looked at the house. "He didn't make it," she said. "No?" Opal said. "He didn't." They stood in the clearing for a while. Scout had appeared from somewhere in the tree line and was sitting near Willa's feet with the watchful patience he seemed to apply to everything. "That's Scout," Opal said. "That's what the notebook says. Your daddy named him about 2 years ago. Stray showed up skinny and half-starved. Thomas started leaving food out every Saturday." Opal nodded toward the tree line, and Willa noticed for the first time a small shelter near the pines. A plywood box with a tarp roof, the construction modest but adequate, built with the same level of competence, Thomas brought to everything even when he was building something that only a dog would use. Built him that, Scout would follow him around the property all day. Your daddy used to say he was the best assistant he'd ever had. Willa looked down at the dog. Scout looked back. Come eat, Opal said. Real breakfast. Not whatever's in those cans. Over scrambled eggs and coffee at Opal's kitchen table a quarter-mile off the main gravel road, a white-clapboard farmhouse that smelled of coffee and wood stove, and something baking, the older woman told Willa what she knew. Thomas had bought the lot at a county tax auction. The previous owner had died without heirs, the taxes had gone unpaid, and the county had listed it as a hunting parcel with a condemned structure, an old cabin from the 1950s. The roof collapsed and the walls too far gone for anything but demolition. Thomas had seen the listing, done the math, and shown up on the day of the auction with $340 in cash. He had been the only bidder. He had spent the first 6 months of Saturdays tearing down the old cabin to its foundation, sorting the usable lumber from the waste, hauling the waste to the county dump load by load in his truck. He had kept the foundation footprint, poured concrete, surprisingly sound, the work of someone in the 50s who had done it correctly and had built the new structure on top of it. Everything else was his. He never told me, Willa said. He never told anyone except me and Gareth because Gareth was selling him the materials. Opal set her coffee down. Your daddy was a proud man, Willa. Not the bad kind of proud. The kind that doesn't want credit for doing what he thinks is his job. She paused. Providing for you was his job. He didn't need you to know about it until it was done. But it's not done. No, Opal said. But it's closer than you might think. The hard part is done. The frame is right. The roof is right. The foundation is right. What's left is finishing work. Willa ate her eggs. Scout was outside. She could hear him moving on the porch. He had a saying, Opal said. He used to say it when I'd come over with coffee and he'd been working all morning on something that looked to me like it was barely started. He'd look at whatever he was doing and he'd say, some people build cathedrals. I'm just building my girl a place to come home to. She paused. And I told him that was the same thing. Willa walked to Gareth Marsh's store that afternoon, 4 miles again, and she was going to have to develop a plan about transportation, but for now her feet worked. Gareth was behind the counter when she came in, and something in his expression when he saw her, a loosening, a quiet exhale, told her he had been waiting to see whether she would come back. I need to ask you something directly, Willa said. Did my father leave anything with you? Gareth looked at her for a moment. Then he reached under the counter and brought out a manila folder. He set it on the counter between them. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Handwritten in Thomas's block letters, the letters smaller and more deliberate than his usual notation, the handwriting of someone writing carefully because the words mattered. I, Thomas Roy Calloway, being of sound mind, leave all property in my name, including the real property at Lot 14 Miller Creek Road, Ridley, North Carolina, to my daughter Willa Ann Calloway. This includes all tools, vehicles, savings accounts, and any other assets in my name at the time of my death. Witnessed by Gareth Allen Marsh and Patricia Sue Marsh, Ridley, North Carolina. Notarized April 4th, 2024. 2 signatures below Thomas's, 2 dates. At the bottom, a notary stamp with a date 3 weeks before Thomas died. Willa held the paper and read it twice. He paid off his tab here 3 months before he passed, Gareth said. Every cent. 7 years of materials, and he paid it all off, and then he came in and asked me and Patricia to witness this. He paused. He said he had about 4 more months of work on the house and he was going to give it to you on your birthday in October. He asked me to hold on to this in the meantime. He mentioned Dale, Willa said. He mentioned Dale. Gareth took off his reading glasses and cleaned them on his shirt. He said his brother had a way of showing up when there was something to take. He wanted to make sure the property got to you with no ambiguity about it. The notarized copy is filed with the county courthouse in Raleigh. He put his glasses back on. He finished what he started, your father. Paid the tab, filed the will, tied off every loose end. That was Thomas. Willa nodded. She folded the will and put it in her jacket pocket where it sat alongside the deed, both documents now worn at the creases from handling. Her father's handwriting in both. His block capitals, deliberate and precise, saying in the language of legal documents What he had said in the language of boards and nails, "In 7 years of Saturdays, this is yours. This was always going to be yours. I was just taking the time to build it right." 2 days later, Dale's truck turned off the gravel road and up the dirt path to the clearing. Willa was on a ladder painting the trim around the second-floor dormers. She had found a partial can of exterior paint in the supply area Thomas had set up in the southeast corner of the ground floor. A white semi-gloss with a label that matched the trim on the one-finished section of exterior when she heard the diesel engine. She knew the sound. She had grown up with it. She came down the ladder and set the brush across the can and wiped her hands on her jeans and waited. Dale parked at the edge of the clearing and got out. He had lost weight since the funeral, or maybe she was seeing him more clearly than she had before. He stood by the truck and looked at the house. The whole of it 3 stories with the tower at the corner rising from the cleared ground, with the solid, unhurried quality of something built by someone who understood load paths. He looked at it for a long time, and she could see him doing a kind of calculation, the specific mental arithmetic of a man who is used to assessing the value of things. "What the hell is this?" he said. "It's my house," Willa said. Dale walked closer. He looked at the roof, the siding, the finished trim on the east face. "Thomas built this. Thomas started it. I'm finishing it." "On what land?" "His land. Bought and paid for. I have the deed." Something moved across Dale's face. Surprise first, then the rapid recalibration that followed it, then something that landed in the vicinity of anger, but had underneath it, she thought, a quality that was closer to envy. "He never told me he owned property," Dale said. "He never told anyone." "He should have told me." Dale's voice had the flat certainty of a man who is used to his own reasoning. "I'm his brother. I had a right to know." Willa felt something settle in her chest, cold and completely still. "A right," she said. "You took his tools, his truck, our kitchen table. You took the welding rig he saved 2 years to buy. Now you want to stand here and talk about rights." Dale pointed at the house. "This is worth something. Land a structure this size. Dad would have wanted us to share." "Dad left me this," Willa said. "Specifically me. There's a will, Dale, witnessed and notarized, filed with the county." That stopped him. His mouth worked for a moment. "A will, Yen. Everything Thomas owned goes to me. The land, the house, all of it." She kept her voice even. She was surprised at how even it was. "Gareth Marsh and his wife witnessed it. You want to spend money on a lawyer to contest a notarized will filed with the county courthouse, go ahead. But you won't win." Dale stared at her. She could see him searching for the angle, the leverage point, the place where this version of events had a gap he could work into. She watched the moment he understood there wasn't one. "He should have told me," Dale said, quieter now. "We were brothers. You took everything he had in the apartment and left me with a Bible. Don't talk to me about what he should have done." Dale looked at the ground. He stood in the clearing for a long time with his hands in his pockets, looking at nothing specific, the posture of a man with nowhere left to go in a conversation. "You look like him," he said finally. He said it to the ground rather than to her. "Standing there like that, you look just like him." He turned and walked back to his truck, got in without another word, and drove back down the path to the gravel road. Willa stood in the clearing until the engine sound was gone, then a minute more. Her hands had been shaking, and she had not let it show, but she could feel them shaking now. She clenched them at her sides and waited for it to stop. Scout pressed his body against her leg from the left. She reached down and put her hand on his head. He was warm and solid and entirely present. "We're fine," she told him. "He's gone." She went back to the ladder. In the evenings after the light failed and the work stopped, she read the notebook. She started from the beginning, each time the building notes and the notes to her interwoven in Thomas's careful hand, and she found new things, each reading details she had missed references. She now understood because she had walked through the room or seen the structure the note described. Page 7. Hot water heater next. Check Opal's garage. She said Franklin's unit is just sitting there. Offer to trade for fixing her porch railing. Page 14. Front porch framing done. Need the railing posts. Gareth has cedar at cost if I ask. Don't ask yet. Wait until the roof is paid off. Page 17, bathroom tile. Willa likes blue. Fine blue tile. Page 20, second floor drywall is going to take 4 or 5 Saturdays. Put on good music. Don't rush the tape. Each page was like this. Building notes and fatherly observations in small logistical plans woven together without distinction, as if the house and his daughter were genuinely the same subject in his mind, and maybe they were. Maybe every board he nailed, every joint he fitted, every measurement he checked and rechecked was just another way of saying the thing he said directly, only in the pages of this notebook, the thing that was too large to say out loud, and so had to be said in the accumulation of 7 years of physical labor on a piece of land 40 miles from home. She was on page 22 when she found the pocket. It was in the back cover of the notebook, not an exterior pocket, but an interior one. A horizontal slit cut into the cardboard of the back cover, perhaps 4 inches long. The edges of the cut sealed with a piece of the same blue painter's tape Thomas used for everything. She had run her hands over the cover before without noticing it, because the tape blended into the cardboard. But tonight, holding the notebook at an angle in the lantern light, she felt the slight elevation of the tape edge under her thumb. She peeled the tape back carefully. The pocket was shallow, a 1/4 inch maybe, enough to hold paper. Inside were 2 envelopes. She set them on the cot side by side. Both were sealed. Both had the same handwriting on the front, not Thomas's block letters, but a smaller, rounder script. The handwriting of someone writing carefully and slowly, as if each letter required its full attention. On the front of the first envelope in that careful hand, Thomas. On the front of the second, Thomas. Nothing else. No address, no return address. Just the name written twice in 2 different envelopes that had clearly been written at different times. The first envelope was older. The paper faintly yellowed. The ink a slightly different shade than the second. Willa held the first envelope. The seal was still intact, or it had been resealed, she couldn't tell. The flap was closed with the particular smooth adhesion of something that might have been opened and closed again, the original glue supplemented by a second application. Or maybe it had never been opened. There was no way to know. She slid her thumb under the flap. The paper inside was thin line torn from a legal pad. The same handwriting as the envelope, the letters formed with the slow deliberateness of someone who was being careful, or someone whose hands didn't always do what they were told. It was dated 11 years ago. Thomas, I know you won't write back. I know you're angry and you have every right, but I need you to know why I left, because Willa deserves the truth even if she never hears it from me. I was diagnosed in February. Early onset MSA, multiple system atrophy. The neurologist said I had maybe 10 good years before my body started shutting down piece by piece. I was 27 years old, and I had a 3-year-old daughter who needed a mother who could carry her and chase her and hold her steady when she was scared. I couldn't be that mother, not for long, and I couldn't let her watch me disappear. I know what you'll say. You'll say she needed me anyway. You'll say sick is better than gone. Maybe you're right. But I saw my own mother waste away from something similar, and I promised myself I would never put a child through that. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking you to understand that I loved her because I loved her, not because I didn't. Leaving was the only thing I could give her that would cost me everything and give her a chance at normal. Please don't tell her I'm sick. Let her be angry at me for leaving. Anger is easier to carry than pity. Eleanor. Willa read the letter once. Then she read it again. Then she set it on the cot and looked at the east window at the darkness beyond it, and she breathed. Her mother had been sick. Her mother had been diagnosed with a degenerative neurological disease at 27 years old when Willa was 3, and she had left because she was dying, and she had not wanted her daughter to watch it happen. 15 years. 15 years of believing that her mother had simply not wanted to be a mother, had chosen a life without a child, over a life with one, had looked at Willa and found her insufficient reason to stay. 15 years of carrying that specific and efficient wound, the wound that said I was not enough to make her stay. And Thomas had known. He had known for 11 years, and he had kept Eleanor's request. He had let Willa carry the anger because Eleanor had asked him to, because Eleanor had believed correctly. Willa understood now with the clarity of someone looking at something she had been too close to see before. That anger was easier to carry than the grief of watching someone you love disappear by degrees. Her hands were completely steady. She noticed this with a kind of detached interest. She had expected them to shake. She opened the second envelope. This one was newer, the paper crisper, the handwriting slightly more labored than the first, the letters formed with more visible effort, as if the hand that wrote them had less precision available to it than it once had. Dated 5 years ago, Thomas. It's been 6 years since my last letter, and I don't know if you read that one either. But I'm writing because I want you to know where I am in case something happens to me and Willa ever wants to find out. I'm at the Greenfield Care Center in Bristol, Virginia, room 214. My legs went last year and my right arm is unreliable now. I can still write if I go slowly. I heard through June that Willa graduated high school. I cried for 2 hours. I am so proud of her and so proud of you for raising her right. I also heard you're building something. June wouldn't say what or where, but she said you've been at it for years. If it's for Willa, then you're a better parent than I ever was. She deserves a home. She deserves everything. I don't expect to hear from you, but if Willa ever asks about me, you can tell her. Or don't. That's your choice. I gave up the right to decide when I walked out that door. I love her. I have loved her every single day since I left. Eleanor. Willa set both letters on the cot side by side. She looked at them. 2 letters spanning 6 years. A woman writing into silence with diminishing capability. The handwriting in the second letter was measurably harder one than the first. The letters slightly more irregular, the lines less even. Writing to a man who had not written back, who had kept the letters and kept the secret, and built the letters into the notebook in the house he was building for their daughter, where she would eventually find them. He had not burned them. He had not thrown them away. He had put them in a hidden pocket in a notebook labeled with his daughter's name in a room she would someday sleep in, and he had trusted her to find them at the right moment, because he had known that the right moment was the one that she determined, not the one that he arranged. He had wanted her to know. He just hadn't wanted to be the one to tell her. Willa put both letters carefully back in their envelopes and put the envelopes back in the pocket in the back cover. She smoothed the tape back into place as close to its original adhesion as she could manage. Greenfield Care Center, Bristol, Virginia, room 214, 5 years ago. She did not know whether Eleanor was still there. She did not know whether Eleanor was still alive. She did not know what 5 years of multiple system atrophy looked like, what remained of a person after that duration, whether room 214 still held the woman who had written those careful, halting letters. She sat with not knowing. Scout was awake. She could tell by the quality of his stillness, the specific alert stillness of an awake dog, as opposed to the loose, settled stillness of a sleeping one. He was watching her from his corner in the way he watched everything, with the patient, non-judgmental attention of an animal that has learned that most human distress resolves itself if you give it enough time and enough steady presence. She looked at the east window. The stars were thick in the square of sky above the pines, the rural dark dense enough to show the Milky Way as a faint smear across the upper portion of the frame, something she had not seen from the apartment in Garner in years. She was not going to decide tonight. There was no urgency here that required tonight. Whatever was in Bristol, Virginia had been there for at least 5 years, and it would still be there in a week or a month when she was ready to think about it clearly. What she had right now was a house her father had built for her unfinished, and a notebook full of what he had intended to finish it with, and a list of things that needed doing, and the skills and the stubbornness to do them. She opened the notebook to a blank page in the back, found the pencil in the supply bin. She wrote the date, and then she wrote in her own handwriting alongside her father's April 8th. Moved in. Job at Gareth starts Monday. Scout is here. Need hot water heater, drywall, blue tile, porch lumber. Need to connect toilet. Need to finish second floor. She looked at the list. Then she added one line at the end. I'm going to finish what you started, Dad. She set the notebook on the shelf Thomas had mounted at exactly her height on the east wall of the east-facing room in the house he had built in 7 years of Saturdays, and she lay down on the cot and pulled the wool blanket up and watched the stars in the east window until her eyes closed. Scout's weight settled warm and steady at her feet. The house was quiet around her. The particular quiet of a structure in the process of becoming what it was meant to be, not empty but gathered patient, full of the specific potential of a thing whose bones are right and whose finishing is only a matter of time and will, and the willingness to begin. Monday morning, Willa was at Gareth Marsh's hardware store at 6:50. He unlocked the door at 7 sharp, looked at her standing in the parking lot with sawdust already in her hair from an hour of work in the house before she walked the 4 miles to town, and said, "Coffee's in the back." She worked mornings at the store and afternoons at the house, and the division was clean in the way that routines become clean when they are built around necessity rather than preference. At the store, she stocked shelves, organized inventory, helped customers find what they needed. The work was physical and uncomplicated, and her mind could rest while her hands were occupied, which was something she had not known she needed until she found herself doing it, the specific relief of labor that required attention, but not the kind of attention that pulled from the same reserve as grief. Gareth did not hover. He showed her the system once and let her figure the rest out, and by Wednesday she knew where everything was in the store, from the finished nails in their sorted bins to the specialty hinges in the narrow drawer at the end of the hardware aisle that nobody seemed to buy, but that Thomas had ordered twice in 7 years, she learned from the file Gareth kept. She found the file by accident, a manila folder labeled with Thomas's name in Gareth's handwriting, and when she opened it, she found a record of every transaction, every purchase, the entire 7 years of material that had become the house, documented in the same meticulous way Thomas had documented it in his notebook, 2 parallel records of the same building, maintained by 2 different men in 2 different places. Afternoon she built. The first major project was the bathroom. Thomas had run all the supply lines and set the drain, had positioned the toilet flange and the shower drain, and stubbed the hot and cold lines through the subfloor in the precise locations that the fixture layout required. Everything was there ready. The connections were not made. Willa watched 3 YouTube videos on her phone, sitting on the bathroom floor with Scout lying in the doorway watching her, and borrowed a pipe wrench and a propane torch from Gareth's tool lending shelf. She spent a full afternoon on her back under the subfloor, working in the cramped space between the floor joists, with her arms above her head connecting PVC fittings with primer and cement. She got the sequence wrong on the first joint, discovered this when she turned the shutoff valve and water appeared at the floor seam rather than at the faucet, and cut the section out and started over. The second attempt failed when she glued a fitting backwards, which required sawing through the pipe and remaking the section from a new length. The third attempt worked. When she flushed the toilet for the first time and water went where water was supposed to go, she sat on the bathroom floor and laughed out loud in the empty house. Scout tilted his head from the doorway with the expression of a dog evaluating whether human laughter constitutes an emergency. "Running water," she told him. "That's not nothing." He seemed to decide it was not an emergency. The hot water heater came from Opal's garage, which Willa had known it would since she found page 7 of the notebook. She walked over on a Saturday morning and asked directly the way she had learned to ask things from Thomas, who believed that the most respectful version of her request was the straightforward one. Opal led her to the garage and showed her the unit, a 40-gallon gas heater installed in 2009 by Opal's late husband, Franklin, replaced with an electric unit 2 years later, sitting in the corner of the garage with a slight coating of dust but otherwise intact. They loaded it together into Opal's truck, drove it to the property, and wrestled it through the front door opening. "Your daddy was going to trade me for it," Opal said, leaning against the truck while Willa measured the gas line connection. "Fix my porch railing in exchange." "I'll fix your railing," Willa said. "I know you will," Opal said. "I'm not in a rush." The installation took 3 days and 2 phone calls to Gareth, one about the gas line connection, which she was not confident about, and one about the venting through the roof, which required a specific flashing approach she had not encountered before. Gareth walked her through both over the phone, and on the gas connection, he made her describe what she had done in detail, and then told her to check it with soapy water before she lit the pilot, and to do it 3 times, not once. She did it 3 times, no bubbles. She lit the pilot. The first hot shower she took in the house, standing in the unfinished bathroom with exposed studs around her, and a plastic curtain she had hung from a wire stretched between 2 screws. She'd driven into the framing, was one of the best moments of her life to that point. Hot water on her shoulders after 3 weeks of cold well water. in the borrowed facilities at Opal's sink. She stood under it until it started to cool and then dried off and put on clean clothes and stood in the kitchen looking out the window at the tree line. And the feeling she had was not happiness exactly, but something more structural than happiness. The feeling of a foundation being laid. Progress. Small, specific, real. The second bedroom took 4 Saturdays and 2 weekday evenings working after she walked back from Gareth's store. She drywalled the walls and the ceiling, taped and mudded the joints in the sequence Gareth had demonstrated for her on a piece of scrap drywall behind the store tape. First thin coat of mud, feather, the edges, let it dry completely. Sand, second coat, thinner than the first sand again. Her first wall looked like what it was, the work of someone learning. Her fifth wall looked like the work of someone who had learned. And in the middle of all of it, the town came to her. She did not understand at first how small-town information traveled the specific routes it took through church pews and diner conversations and the social architecture of a place where most of the residents had known each other for decades. She had not told anyone what she was doing beyond Gareth and Opal. But within 2 weeks of her arriving in Ridley and starting work on the house, she became aware that the town knew about it anyway, and that the town had formed opinions. The opinions were, with one significant exception, favorable. Ray Caldwell came first. He was a plumber mid-40s with the large scarred hands of a man who had spent 20 years in tight spaces with sharp tools. He walked into Gareth's store on a Thursday morning and asked for Willa by name. "You the Calloway girl on Miller Creek?" "That's me." "Gareth says you did your own plumbing from YouTube videos." "I did." Ray grinned. "I want to come look at it, make sure nothing's going to burst on you in January." "I can't pay a plumber." He looked almost offended. "Your daddy helped me frame my garage 8 years ago. Wouldn't take a dime. Said neighbors help neighbors." He shrugged. So, neighbors helping neighbors. Ray came on Saturday. He inspected every joint, every connection, every fitting under the house and above it. He found 2 places where Willa's work needed reinforcement caught before they failed rather than after, and 3 places where Thomas's original rough-in plumbing was, in Ray's words, better than what he saw in most new construction. "Your daddy knew what he was doing," Ray said, tightening a fitting under the kitchen sink. "These joints are cleaner than anything I've seen from a non-plumber." He was careful. "Careful is one word," Willa said. "Obsessive is another." He stood up. "This is love built into copper pipe. I have never seen anything quite like it." He charged her nothing. He said if she wanted to pay him back, she could help his wife with her garden in the fall. Willa said she would. Don Everett came the following week. Retired electrician, had been selling surplus wire and components from his garage on weekends for 15 years, which was how Thomas had come to buy $60 worth of 12-gauge wire from him 6 years ago. Don had thought Thomas was reselling it. He had not understood until now where it had gone. Don spent 20 minutes at the panel, tightened 2 connections, replaced a breaker he said was rated too low for the kitchen circuit. He stayed for an hour after drinking coffee and telling Willa stories about her father, that she had not known the specificity of Thomas, the way he had sorted the wire Don sold him by gauge before he put it in the truck, the way he had asked careful questions about load calculations and voltage drop, that suggested even then that he was planning something serious. "He bought every scrap I had," Don said. 12, 14, even some old 10-gauge I was about to throw out. I thought I was getting rid of junk. Turns out I was supplying a house. 3 women from the Baptist church came on a Wednesday afternoon. They arrived together in a single car, introduced themselves as the pastor's wife and 2 members of the women's auxiliary, and presented Willa with curtains handmade white cotton with blue trim, enough for the east window in the ground floor room and the 2 dormers on the second floor. "We heard what your daddy was building," the pastor's wife said. "We'd have helped him if we'd known." Willa thanked them and hung the curtains that evening. The east window looked different with them, more finished, more inhabited the room, resolving further toward the thing Thomas had intended it to be. Every person who came had a story. Thomas buying materials, Thomas asking questions, Thomas helping with something, some project, some repair, always refusing payment, always framing the refusal the same way he was just doing what needed doing. And that wasn't the kind of thing you charge for. Willa wrote the stories down in the notebook, the pages after the last of Thomas's entries, her handwriting beside his. She was aware that she was doing something that had no exact name recording, not just the work, but the texture of it, the people who appeared and what they carried of her father, and what they left behind when they went. She was building a record of a man from the outside in, assembling from the fragments of other people's encounters a picture of someone she had known her whole life, and apparently not known at all. Not in the way these people knew him. Not in the way that a community knows a person who has moved through it quietly and left his mark in the small, specific ways that people do when they help without accounting. She had known him as a father. These people had known him as a neighbor, a colleague, a man of his word. The two versions of him were the same man, and holding both of them at once was a form of knowledge she had not had before. The second floor came together through June. Drywall flooring windows, she pulled the plastic sheeting from the frames and installed the glass units Thomas had stored in the northeast corner of the ground floor, each one wrapped carefully in moving blankets and labeled with its location in the house in his block letters. She painted the second floor rooms with primer first, then two coats of the neutral white Thomas had used on the ground floor because it seemed right to match what he had started. The staircase from the second floor to the third was replaced. The temporary lumber Thomas had clamped in place, functional but unfinished, visibly temporary, came out in sections and was replaced with a proper stair cut from the same pine as the rest of the house. Each tread and riser fitted the way Thomas had fitted everything. It took her 2 weeks to get it right. She was not as fast as Thomas, and she made more errors, but she understood now the principle he had always operated by: the extra time you spent on the joint was less time than you would spend fixing it later. The tower room on the third floor she worked on, alone the way she had first seen it, alone the way it seemed to require. 3 days on the scaffold, Thomas had built and left in place, measuring and cutting the window frames to the precise dimensions the openings required, fitting the glass into each frame with the glazing points in putty that Gareth had shown her. The view from each direction as she installed each pane, she paused, each time looked out, looked at what her father had known would be there. The valley, the ridge, the clearing below. She was installing the windows Thomas had planned to install in the room Thomas had built to see from, and the convergence of the intention and the completion had a quality she didn't try to name because naming it would have made it smaller than it was. The exterior she painted in the first week of July. She found the paint color on page 17 of the notebook. Blue, not bright, not gray, the color of early morning sky in October, the color she likes. Thomas had noted a specific brand and shade, a historically accurate exterior color from a local paint company, the kind of color that had been used on craftsman houses a century ago and still looked exactly right on them. She special ordered 2 gallons from Gareth. She spent 6 days on a ladder. The north face first, working around the unfinished sections, painting what was complete and leaving the rough sheathing areas for when the siding was in place. The east face, the south face with its porch and the 3 sets of window trim Thomas had installed. The west face last working in the morning before the afternoon sun made the west side of the house a radiator. When the last wall was done, she climbed down the ladder and walked to the edge of the clearing and looked at the house from a distance. Blue pale and specific, the color of early October morning sky, the trim white, the roof dark, the tower window frames catching the afternoon light and throwing it back as a brief specific glint. A house, a finished one, or close enough to finished that the distinction was becoming academic. She was still looking at it when she heard a truck on the path. Not the smooth diesel of Dale's truck, a different engine one she didn't recognize. Smaller. An old truck, from the sound of it, the engine a little rough at idle. She turned and watched a dark green pickup come up the path at the careful speed of a driver who was treating someone else's road with respect. Dale got out. She had not seen him since the day she had shown him the will, the day he had stood in the clearing and done his calculation and found no leverage. 6 weeks ago, maybe 7. He looked different, thinner. His clothes had the rumpled quality of things worn without particular attention, the collar of his shirt off center in a way he would not have allowed before. He had not shaved in several days. He parked at the edge of the clearing and sat in the cab for a full minute before getting out. When he did, he didn't look at the house first. He looked at Willa. He walked toward her and stopped at the base of the porch, which still had no steps. The threshold still suspended 3 feet off the ground, and looked up at her where she stood on the boards. "I'm not here about the property," he said. Willa waited. Dale put his hands in his pockets. He looked at the cleared ground at his feet, then at the tree line, then back at the porch. He didn't look at her directly. "Sheila left," he said. "3 weeks ago. Said I was mean and getting meaner, and she wasn't going to wait around for it to get worse." He kicked at a piece of gravel. She wasn't wrong. Willa sat down on the edge of the porch, her feet hanging over the gap where the steps needed to go, and she waited. "I've been thinking about Thomas," Dale said. "About what I did after the funeral." He finally looked at her. His eyes were red at the edges in the way of someone who has not been sleeping. "He didn't owe me $4,000. I owed him. I owed him probably $20,000 over 20 years. Borrowing money and never paying it back. Showing up when I needed something and disappearing when I didn't." "I know," Willa said. "I know you know." His voice was quiet. "I just never said it out loud. To anyone." The clearing was quiet. A bird in the pines, scouts breathing from somewhere behind Willa on the porch boards. "Your daddy never said no to me," Dale said. "Not once. Whenever I called, he showed up. Whenever I needed money, he found it. 20 years of that, and I never once—" He stopped. His jaw worked. "I never said thank you. Not once in 20 years. Willa looked at her uncle. He was Thomas's brother. They had the same frame, the same jawline, the same broad hands. Thomas had used those hands to build things. Dale had used his differently, and the difference had accumulated over decades into the specific shape of the man now standing at the base of her porch. "I sold the welding rig," Dale said. "Got $800 for it. I can give you that." "Keep it," Willa said. He stared at her. "Keep it." "I don't want your money, Dale. I don't need it." Something shifted in his face. Not understanding, not quite. But something moving in that direction, the beginning of a recalibration, a man encountering for the first time the possibility that the economy he had always operated in, the economy of debts and repayments of what was owed and what was taken, was not the only economy available. "You sound like him," Dale said quietly. Willa looked at the porch where the steps needed to go. At the lumber stacked against the south wall cedar, the right dimensions waiting. "You know how to use a saw," she said. Dale blinked. "What?" "I need to build steps. 3 of them. I've got the lumber." She nodded at the stack. "You know how to use a saw." He looked at the lumber. He looked at the gap where the steps needed to go. He looked at her. For a moment he looked like a man who has been offered something he is not sure he deserves and does not know how to receive it. "Yeah," he said. "I know how to use a saw." They worked for 3 hours. Dale measured and cut the stringers while Willa cut the treads, and they worked in the way of people who know how to work and don't need to talk while they're doing it. Dale was good with a saw, better than she had expected, his hands remembering skills that his recent years had not required. He was precise with his measurements. He checked his angles twice before he cut the way Thomas had always done. When the steps were done, 3 of them solid and level attached to the porch framing, with the hardware Thomas had left in the supply area, Dale sat on the bottom one and drank water from the bottle Willa gave him and looked at the house. "He built all of this himself," Dale said. "Most of it, 7 years. 7 years. He shook his head slowly. "I knew he was good with his hands. But this," he looked at the tower at the 3rd-floor corner. "This is something else." "It's love," Willa said. She said it without thinking about it, and as soon as the word was out, she knew it was accurate, not sentimental, just true. The house wasn't a project. It was the largest thing Thomas had ever said to her, said in the only language he fully trusted, the language of things built correctly and meant to last. Dale looked at the steps he had just built. 3 steps, maybe 2 hours of a skilled carpenter's time, against the 7 years of Saturdays that surrounded him on every side. He seemed to understand this proportion without needing it explained. "I should go," he said, standing. "You can come back," Willa said. "If you want." He nodded without saying anything. He got in the truck and drove down the path, and Willa watched the truck go until the sound of the engine faded into the pines. That evening, she walked to Opal's. She told Opal about the letters. She had been carrying them for 3 weeks now, and she had thought about them every day. Not obsessively, not in the way of someone who cannot put a thing down, but steadily. The way you think about something that has altered the shape of your understanding and requires time to settle into the new arrangement. They sat on Opal's porch in the warm dark of a July evening, fireflies moving in the tall grass at the edge of the yard, and Willa told the older woman what she had found in the pocket of the notebook and what the letters had said. Opal was quiet for a long time after. "Did Thomas ever talk about your mother?" she finally asked. "Never, not once. I asked a few times when I was little and he'd change the subject. After a while, I stopped asking." "He was keeping a promise," Opal said. "I know." Willa looked at the fireflies. "She asked him not to tell me. He kept that, all the way to the end." "Are you angry?" Willa thought about it. Properly thought about it, not the reflexive answer. "I don't know what I am. Angry feels too simple. She made a choice, and the choice was wrong. For me, wrong for her, maybe wrong in every direction. But she made it because she loved me. I can hold both of those things at the same time." "That's a very adult answer," Opal said. "I don't feel very adult." Opal put her hand on Willa's arm for a moment. "You're 19 years old, and you're finishing a house your father built for 7 years. You're processing the fact that your mother left out of love instead of indifference. You're letting your uncle back in after what he did." She paused. "If that's not adult, I don't know what is." Willa leaned back in the chair. The stars were thick above the tree line, the rural dark showing more of them than any sky she had lived under before. "She's in a care facility in Virginia," Willa said. "Bristol, at least she was 5 years ago." "That's 3 hours from here," Opal said. "I know. Are you going to go?" Willa watched a firefly rise from the grass, bright for a second, and then dark. "Not yet," she said. "But maybe. I don't know when." "There's no rush," Opal said. "She waited 15 years. She can wait a little longer." She walked home in the dark Scout beside her on the gravel road, the night warm and full of sound insects and tree frogs, and the small movements of the forest settling into its nighttime version of itself. At the house, she sat on the new steps and looked at the property in the dark. 2 acres. The tower room above her, the pale glow of the east window below it where she had left the lamp on. Thomas's wheelbarrow still at the tree line where he had left it. She went inside and opened the notebook to a fresh page and wrote what she had decided. July 14th. House almost done. 1 or 2 weeks. Exterior paint finished. Second floor finished. Tower windows in. Porch steps done, Dale built them. She paused. Then found Mom's letters 3 weeks ago. MSA. Bristol, Virginia. Not ready yet, but maybe. She set the pencil down and looked at what she had written. Her handwriting beside Thomas's, the pages after his last entry filling in a continuation he had not gotten to write himself. The front door was the last major piece. She found it at the salvage yard. Gareth had told her about a solid core door oak painted over 4 or 5 times the hardware, old but the wood beneath the paint sound. $35. She spent a full Saturday stripping it with a heat gun, working through the layers white, then green, then a dark red that she thought might have been original until she reached the raw wood. Oak with a straight, tight grain, the kind of door that had been made when doors were made to last. She sanded it smooth. 3 coats of polyurethane, each one dry before the next. The finished door had the warm depth of properly finished hardwood, the grain visible through the clear coats, the surface smooth and even. Gareth came out to help her hang it. He brought a level and new hinges in a deadbolt he said had been in the returns bin for months. They spent 45 minutes shimming the frame, checking the swing, adjusting, until the door moved freely and latched cleanly with a sound that was definitive and solid, the sound of a well-hung door in a true frame. When they were done, Willa closed the door from the inside and turned the deadbolt. The click of a lock in a door she owned. She opened it again and stood in the doorway looking out at the clearing. Gareth was packing his tools on the porch. "That's a house," he said without looking up from his toolbox. "A real one." It is, Willa said. Your daddy would have had something to say about that door. He would have stood there for 10 minutes checking the gap along the frame, making sure the weather stripping sat right. He would have found something wrong with it. Absolutely, Gareth said. And then he would have fixed it and said it was perfect. She locked the front door with the key Gareth had cut for her, a real key for a real lock on a real door, and put it on a ring with the key to Gareth's store and dropped it in her pocket. She could feel the weight of both keys as she walked through the house one more time from room to room, taking inventory. The kitchen butcher block countertop pine cabinets, a window over the sink looking out at the tree line. Hot and cold water. The two-burner gas range Opal had found at an estate sale and delivered in her truck without asking whether it was wanted. The bathroom blue tile on the floor, she had found the tile at a salvage yard, 40 cents a square foot in the color Thomas had noted on page 17, and had spent an entire Saturday laying it in the pattern he had sketched in the margin of the notebook. White walls, shower that worked, toilet that flushed. Mirror from a thrift store, a chip in the corner, perfectly functional. The finished bedroom east window with the blue trimmed curtains from the church. The twin mattress Opal had moved from her guest room. Clean sheets, the lamp on the shelf Thomas had mounted at Willa's eyeline. The second bedroom, pale blue walls, the color she had found in the back of Gareth's store, a returned can wrong color for whoever had ordered it, exactly right for this room. And she would understand later that Thomas had bought this same color 4 months before he died and returned it when he decided the drywall needed more time. Gareth had set the returned can aside because he had known she would want it eventually. Empty room ready for whatever came next. The porch cedar railing, 3 solid steps, 2 weathered Adirondack chairs she had found at a yard sale, and set facing south the way Thomas had drawn them on page 11. Big enough for 2 chairs. The tower, 4 windows looking in 4 directions. The valley and the ridge and the clearing and the forest. The view her father had built the tower to provide. She came back to the front porch and sat in one of the Adirondack chairs. Scout jumped up beside her and turned 3 circles before settling with his head on her knee. The sun was going down behind the trees. The sky above the pines went orange and then rose and then faded toward the deep blue of a summer evening. The first star appeared above the eastern ridge and then more, and then the sky was doing what the sky did in places far enough from other light to show itself fully. She sat and watched the light go. 2 months and 11 days. That's how long it had taken her to finish what Thomas had started. 7 years of his Saturdays and 2 months of hers in the hands of everyone Thomas had ever quietly helped returning, now what he had given out without ledger or expectation. She thought about writing the letter. She had been thinking about it for weeks, composing sentences while she worked, revising them, discarding them, starting again. She was not ready to go to Bristol yet, that was true, and she was not going to pretend otherwise. But there was a difference between not being ready to go and not being ready to reach. And she had begun to understand in the way that certain understandings arrive gradually, and then all at once that she was closer to the second kind of ready than she had thought. She went inside and sat at the kitchen table. The table she had built herself from the leftover lumber, sanded and sealed big enough for 2, and she got out a sheet of paper from the supply bin and a pen, and she wrote. She did not plan at first. She had learned from the house that planning was useful up to the point where it became a way of not starting, and the letter had been planned long enough. Dear Eleanor, my name is Willa. I'm your daughter. I'm 19 years old, and I'm writing to you from a house my father built in secret for 7 years on 2 acres of land he bought for $340. I found your letters, both of them. I know about the MSA. I know why you left. I'm not going to pretend I understand it completely because I don't, and I don't think I'll understand it completely for a long time. I was 3 years old, and I grew up believing my mother didn't want me. That's a hard thing to carry, and I carried it for 15 years. But I read what you wrote to Dad, and I believe you. I believe you left because you love me, even though leaving was the wrong choice. I can hold both of those things. Dad died in March. Heart attack. He was 52. He never told me about you. He kept his promise to the end. I finished his house. It has an east window in my bedroom, so I wake up with the morning light. Blue tile in the bathroom. A porch with 2 chairs facing south. There's a dog named Scout who sleeps at the foot of my bed and follows me everywhere. There's a woman named Opal 2 miles east who makes me dinner and tells me the truth about things. There's a man named Gareth who gave me a job and never once treated me like I needed rescuing. I'm okay, I want you to know that. Whatever you were afraid would happen to me, I'm okay. Dad built me somewhere to be, and I'm here. I'm not ready to come to Bristol yet, but I wanted you to know where I am. And I wanted you to know that he built what you hoped he would. If you want to write back, my address is Lot 14 Miller Creek Road, Ridley, North Carolina. Willa. She folded the letter and put it in an envelope and addressed it to the Greenfield Care Center, Bristol, Virginia, room 214. She didn't know if Eleanor was still there. She didn't know if Eleanor was still alive. She sealed the envelope anyway and put a stamp on it. In the morning, she dropped it in the post office box on her way to Gareth's store. The metal door clanged shut behind it with the specific finality of a thing that has been sent and cannot be unsent. And she walked the rest of the way to the store in the early morning light and went to work. The letter from Bristol came on a Tuesday in September. She found it in the mailbox she had installed at the head of the dirt path, a simple rural box from Gareth's store painted the same blue as the house. The envelope was white and the handwriting on the front was uneven, the letters formed with visible effort, a hand that had to work now to do what it had once done easily. Her name, her address, written by a woman in room 214 of a care facility in Bristol, Virginia, who had been waiting 15 years for a reason to write it. Willa sat on the porch steps, the steps Dale had built with Scout beside her, and she opened the envelope. Dear Willa, I read your letter 4 times. The nurses had to bring me tissues twice. I'm still here, room 214, still fighting. My hands don't work the way they used to, so this letter is going to be short and probably hard to read. Your father was the best man I ever knew, and you sound just like him. I would very much like it if you wrote again whenever you're ready. No rush. I waited 15 years. I can wait a little longer. I love you. I have loved you every single day. Mom. Willa folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. She sat on the steps Dale had built on the porch of the house her father had started looking out at the clearing in the September morning. Scout put his chin on her knee with the specific warm weight of an animal that has made a permanent decision about where it belongs. She was not going to Virginia today. Maybe not this month. But the door was open on both sides now. That was what mattered, not the timing, but the fact of the opening. 2 doors, both unlocked, both waiting. The morning light was coming through the east wall of the house, the east window of the room Thomas had finished first, the room he had built for her to wake up in. She could see it through the open front door, the light on the pale walls, the curtains moving in the September breeze, the shelf mounted at exactly her height. She opened the notebook to the last page she had written on. She found the pencil. Below everything else she had written in the same even hand that had been filling in the pages after Thomas's last entry, she wrote the date, and then she wrote September 9th. Letter from Eleanor. She's still there, still fighting. Not ready yet, but the door's open. She paused. Then she added one more line. The east window is full of light this morning, Dad. Just like you knew it would be. She set the notebook on the shelf Thomas had built at her height on the east wall of the east-facing room, in the house she had finished on the land he had bought for $340 and built for 7 years of Saturdays. Scout jumped up and settled at her feet with the complete trusting finality of a dog that has chosen its person. Outside, the September light moved across the clearing, across the pale blue of the exterior walls, across the tower windows at the third-floor corner that caught the sun and held it briefly, before releasing it as a glint visible from the road, from the trees, from the gravel road where a person walking toward it would first see the light before they saw the house. A signal, a small one, entirely steady. Thomas Calloway had built his daughter a place to come home to, one board at a time, in 7 years of Saturdays in silence and sawdust, and the particular devotion of a man who said what he meant with his hands. He had not lived to give it to her the way he had planned, standing in the finished clearing with the key in his hand and the October light on the blue walls. But she had found it anyway. She had found the deed in the Bible and the map in his handwriting, and she had walked the 4 miles and seen the house emerge from the pines, and she had understood it completely and correctly on the first day. Some people build cathedrals. He had just been building his girl a place to come home to. Opal had been right. That was the same thing.